There are stories that don't make the headlines, cases that are never fully explained, and things that don't stay buried. The kind of stories people don't talk about because they can't. But you found them anyway. This is Studio Sinister. Before we step into a prison in Mexico, before a young journalist has a conversation that will stay with him for the rest of his life, we need to understand the figure at the center of all of this. Hannibal Lecter is one of the most recognizable villains ever created. Not because he's loud or chaotic, but because of how controlled he is. He speaks calmly. He observes carefully. He understands people in a way that makes them feel exposed, studied, and vulnerable, long before anything violent ever happens. The character first appeared in 1981 in Red Dragon, written by Thomas Harris, and from that moment forward, Lecter became something more than a fictional antagonist. He evolved into a cultural figure that audiences couldn't look away from. When Anthony Hopkins portrayed him in The Silence of the Lambs, the performance was so precise and unsettling that the American Film Institute later ranked him as the greatest movie villain of all time in 2003. That kind of presence doesn't come from nowhere. It feels too specific, too grounded in something real. And it is. Because years before Hannibal Lecter existed on paper, Thomas Harris walked into a prison in Monterrey, Mexico, and met a man who would quietly shape the psychological core of that character. We're going back to the early 1960s, inside the Nuevo Leon State Prison in Monterrey. It's a place where structure is everything, and where identity is stripped down to survival. Harris is 23 years old at the time, working as a journalist, there to interview an American inmate named Dykes Askew Simmons. According to reporting from Latin Times and Harris's own later writings, Simmons had been convicted of killing 3 young people and had recently been shot during an attempted escape. Harris described him as having unnerving eyes and a disfigured face from a poorly repaired cleft lip, the kind of detail that immediately makes an impression. Before Harris ever gets to Simmons, he's introduced to the man who treated him, a doctor. He's told his name is Dr. Salazar. Harris meets him in the prison medical office, and what stands out immediately is not fear, not tension, but composure. The doctor is calm, articulate, sharply observant. Harris would later describe him as a small, lithe man with dark red hair and a certain elegance about him, which feels almost out of place in that setting. The conversation begins with routine questions, but it doesn't stay there for long. The doctor shifts the focus towards Simmons in a way that feels analytical rather than emotional. He asks about appearance, about behavior, about the nature of the crime itself. And then, without warning, he asks something that stops Harris in his tracks.
Were the murdered people attractive?
Harris answers yes, likely unsure of where the question is going. The doctor follows up immediately.
You are not saying they provoked him.
Harris clarifies that's not what he means, and the doctor responds in a way that feels less like speculation and more like insight drawn from experience.
Certainly not. But early torment makes torment easily imagined.
There's a shift in the conversation at that point. The doctor becomes more engaged, even slightly amused, as he begins to play with the idea of how violence is described and interpreted.
You are a journalist, Mr. Harris. How would you put that in your journal? How do you treat the fear of torment in journalese? Might you say something snappy about torment, like, it puts the hell in hello?
It's an odd moment, controlled, intellectual, but there's something beneath it that doesn't sit right. Harris leaves the room thinking he's just had a conversation with an unusually perceptive prison doctor. He thanks the staff and mentions how helpful the man had been. That's when the reality of the situation hits him. The prison director looks at him and asks if he knows who he was just speaking to. Harris doesn't, and the director makes it clear.
The doctor is a murderer. As a surgeon, he could package his victim in a surprisingly small box. He will never leave this place. He is insane.
That single moment reframes everything Harris just experienced. The calm demeanor, the precise language, the psychological probing. It all takes on a different weight when you realize it's coming from someone who has already committed an act of calculated violence. The man Harris met was Alfredo Ballí Treviño. To understand how he ended up there, we go back to 1959. At the time, Treviño was a medical intern from a prominent family in Mendez, Tamaulipas. His upbringing emphasized discipline and success, and he followed that path into medicine. Outwardly, he represented control and achievement. Privately, his life was more complicated. According to biography and other historical accounts, Treviño had a relationship with a young medical student named Jesus Castillo Rangel. The exact nature of their conflict is not fully agreed upon, but sources consistently point to an argument involving money, personal pressure, or expectations tied to Treviño's future. What is clear is that the argument turned violent. Treviño killed Jesus Castillo Rangel inside his medical office. The details reported by sources like Historic Mysteries describe a methodical process. He used his medical knowledge to carry out the killing, then dismembered the body with surgical precision, reducing it to pieces small enough to fit into a box. He attempted to dispose of the remains on a rural property. The plan failed. According to widely circulated accounts, individuals connected to the situation became suspicious, followed the activity, and ultimately alerted authorities. While some of those accomplice details vary, depending on the source, the central outcome is consistent. The remains were discovered, and Treviño was arrested. In 1961, he was sentenced to death for what was described as a crime of passion. There were also suspicions linking him to other dismemberment cases involving hitchhikers, but those claims were never proven and remain unconfirmed. Inside prison, Treviño adapted in a way that continues to unsettle people who study this case. He resumed practicing medicine. According to Vice and other reports, he treated inmates and used his skills to help those around him. Some accounts suggest he even gained enough trust to assist people outside the prison under supervision, though those details are less consistently documented. He developed a reputation, not just as a killer, but as someone who helped others. He maintained a distinct personal style, wearing light-colored suits, dark glasses due to light sensitivity, and reportedly keeping a gold Rolex watch hidden among his belongings. That attention to appearance never disappeared, even in confinement. That duality is what stayed with Harris. A man capable of calculated violence who could also function as a healer, moving between those roles without outward instability. After approximately 2 decades, his sentence was commuted, and he was released, with most sources placing that around 1980 or 1981. He returned to Monterrey and resumed practicing medicine, often treating the poor and elderly without charge. He lived quietly, worked consistently, and avoided discussing his past. In 2008, he agreed to a final interview with a local newspaper. By that point, he was elderly, in a wheelchair after a spinal injury, but still seeing patients. When the conversation turned to his past, he shut it down.
If you want, we can talk about anything you'd like except for that. I don't want to relive my dark past. I don't want to wake up my ghosts.
He added something else that gives insight into how he viewed his life after prison.
I paid what I had to pay. Now I am just waiting for the divine punishment.
He died in early 2009. For years, people speculated about how Hannibal Lecter was created. Some investigators believed the character was a composite, drawing from individuals like Ted Bundy, Edward Kemper, and Issei Sagawa. Each of them contributed something to the broader idea of an intelligent, psychologically complex killer. But Thomas Harris eventually clarified that the meeting in that Mexican prison played a critical role. In the preface to the 25th anniversary edition of The Silence of the Lambs, he explained how the memory stayed with him as he wrote.
My detective needed to talk to somebody with a peculiar understanding of the criminal mind.
And then he wrote something that directly connects that moment to the creation of Lecter.
Who do you suppose was waiting in the cell? It was not Dr. Salazar? But because of Dr. Salazar, I could recognize his colleague and fellow practitioner, Hannibal Lecter.
That's the truth behind the fiction. Not a direct copy, not a one-to-one translation, but an influence that was strong enough to shape one of the most iconic characters ever created. And when you look at it that way, the story becomes less about Hannibal Lecter and more about something else entirely. The idea that someone can present themselves as controlled, intelligent, even helpful, while carrying something far darker beneath the surface. That contrast is what makes this story linger. Because it forces a question that doesn't have an easy answer. How well do we really understand the people we're speaking to. Thank you for stepping into this story with me. If you have a case, an experience, or something you think deserves to be heard, send it in. You can reach me at studiosinisterpod@gmail.com. And don't forget to follow Studio Sinister on social media to stay up to date on new episodes, clips, and everything coming next. Because the stories don't stop when the episode ends, and sometimes they follow you. Listen closely. Not everything stays in the shadows.